Hi everyone, I'm a Atlantean from the Atlantean race that existed before the manifestation of Earth and the creation of the race as humanity. And I'm here doing interviews to answer the question of whether Atlantis was a myth. At the moment, within this world, within the stories that is circulating within and between and among human beings, Atlantis exists but as a myth. The history of existence is currently layered within memories that is existent as beings currently enslaved and manifested into a mind consciousness system that has personified the manifestation of what is now referred to as a human being. And with that, much of the history, the real history of existence has been stored, hidden away, veiled with memories, systems, and time. And the view or perspective that human beings now have of history is much limited to only Earth's history, and then attempted or tried to make sense of from an existential perspective of the history of the Earth and humanity through myths, through stories, through conjecture. And we are here within these interviews with myself as an Atlantean from Atlantis and many races that will come to share the history of existence within the role each race played that existed before the manifestation of Earth and the race that is now known as humanity. And to realize that there is a reality within the origins of the myth of the existence of Atlantis and Atlanteans. And so from a certain perspective, yes, Atlantis is a myth as it exists at the moment within the minds of human beings. However, it was a reality, and I was part of that reality. And therefore, I will share with you the reality of Atlantis, the reality of Atlanteans as how we existed before the existence, the manifestation and the creation of Earth and humanity. And we'll start our interview with sharing how we existed then, before the creation of physicality, share how we existed, how we functioned, how we expressed, how we communicated, how we lived. And within that, change and transform and clarify the myths, the stories, into understanding and perspective of how it is that humanity came to be, and Atlantis and Atlanteans part within that. Each race that existed before the manifestation of Earth and human beings had a particular part, a particular role, which they played in the participation of the creation of Earth and human beings. And us as Atlanteans was, of course, part of it, actually the part of it. where we became the point that changed the direction of existence. We became the point within the timeline of our existence as beings that changed the nature, the manifestation, and the context of existence as a whole, that led us to where we are today as human beings on Earth within a physical manifested existence, where all that is here now is physicality, and this physical manifested existence. So let us start with ourselves in how we existed before the manifestation of Earth and the creation of humanity. There was a time before Earth and humanity where everything that was here was not as physical as one experiences it to be today. The substance within which we existed was more fluid and free, yet very stable. It was like the substance of existence was a presence, and we were manifestations that emerged from that presence and solidified as a part of that presence, but the solidity wasn't a physical form. The solidity was a densification of the all-encompassing presence as the substance that existence consisted of and existed as. So it was like each race was a part of the total substance of existence that emerged from the substance in a personified form, as though we were individual expressions from the total expression of what existence consisted of and existed as. So there was a oneness within us all as an existence that was here. So for a tangible perspective, you can have a look at, like, for example, a round circle, and within the circle would be the manifestation of existence, and from within that circle individual circles would emerge, and the individual circles that emerged from the greater circle would take on various different forms and shapes, but would still originate from that one circle as source. And that was the experience of ourselves as an existence. It was an experience that existed within each race. Like, we knew that we were part of each other and something greater at the same time. Various races interpreted that something greater as their ancestors, or simply their history. Like, for example, us as Atlanteans interpreted that greatness, that something more, as all of us together originating from one source. And within that, we didn't particularly word it as oneness. We just experienced it as coming from, emerging from the same substance, the same source. I mean, we were more practical in our approach to ourselves and existence. We didn't have an inclination towards believing in ancestors or worshipping ancestors like some other races did. We were more within the context of worshipping all beings that was here with us within the approach of an equality, and that we were all inherently interconnected, and that we as an existence as a whole with all the various races maintained the balance of ourselves and existence as a whole. And one of our main purposes within existence that we stood as within our nature, within our beingness, and how we presented ourselves, how we lived, was standing within that balance, that oneness, that equality that we experienced was here as everything and everyone. And we particularly utilize sound within ourselves to always cross-reference whether the balance within existence was stable. And we'd use sound to automatically correct any discrepancies, because within the substance that existed as within the time of all the races that predated human civilization and Earth, the very manifestation of that substance was molecule forms that expressed and stood as a structural form of stability. So, which means that if the experience of the substance within which we existed was a very soft, silky, liquid form, however, if one would move closer into investigating the nature of the substance, the actual manifestation of the substance, it was round, circular, molecular forms. Just to give a practical current time reference of the manifestation of the substance that we consisted of and existed as. Obviously, the molecules were extremely minute in its manifested form, like really, really, really tiny. I mean, so tiny that simply with being or standing within our form, one wouldn't see them at all. We would particularly utilize a form of vision that we'd utilize to investigate the actual form, the structure of the substance that we consisted of and existed as within existence as a whole. And within each and every single molecular structural form, we could see the totality of our existence. So even with just taking one molecular structural manifested form, we would be able to within it see everything and everyone here, as well as all the dimensions that were layered within the molecular structural form, equal to and one with all the dimensions and layers that manifested the totality of our existence back then. So with our ability of seeing our total existence within each individual molecular structural form, and I'm referring to it as a molecular structural form because of it being the only most practical worldly reference that I'm able to utilize in terms of describing the structural manifested form that the substance consisted of and existed as. And obviously when I do say the structural form, it's simply a form. It's not that it was physical or solid in that it was unchangeable within the substance that we consisted of and existed as, because of the nature of the substance being so fluid, so free-flowing, yet solid at the same time, allowed for much free expression in and as our form that was manifested from and of the substance. And this will be clarified when I share how we, for example, utilized and moved within and as and of this substance that existence consisted of and existed as. And with us as Atlanteans, with our, we can call it our primary belief being that we as an existence as a whole emerged together from this one source, this one substance, and that it was our responsibility to thus be the guardians of existence, the responsibility of living in harmony with ourselves and each other. We utilized our ability to see existence within the individual molecular structural forms to assist and support with just that, maintaining that equality within the oneness that was here. And in terms of how we could see and what we could see within the manifested molecular structural forms, we could also see future play-outs that manifested within existence. We would only utilize it in times of when we see a correction is required to be made, wherein we would allow ourselves to expand our seeing within the molecular structural forms to have a look at what is the nature of that correction that's required to be made, what was its origins, how was it created, and what would our intervention do if we automatically correct it without informing or discussing with the or those responsible for the discrepancy within the manifestation of existence? Or do we require to approach them? Do we require a different race to approach them? How would be best to direct the discrepancy without creating imbalance within existence as a whole? So we primarily worked with the Greys as well, the race that was also primarily responsible for maintaining a equilibrium within our existence. However, the Greys' approach was more within the context of interacting with the actual races within existence, and their maintaining of the equilibrium within existence was more structural in nature, meaning they more looked at making sure that our structural stability was maintained within existence, because what would happen if there was a conflict or a friction or a change, it would send out ripple effects throughout the totality of existence. And not all the races were so aware of their substance, their manifestations of their forms, and therefore would not readily pick it up when there was a ripple effect change that was manifesting, plus the ripple effect changes was more, it was very, 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 very subtle. Oh, so fine, the ripples that went through existence, and it would alter or change the motion, the movement, and the expression of the individual molecular structural manifestations, and only on the very, very inside of the molecular structural manifestations, as there was a core within each molecular structural manifestation. That core was each molecular structural manifestation's expression. That expression was the power source, the life that was existent within and as everything. So within each molecular structural form there was a life source. And this also primarily why us as Atlanteans believed in that we are here as a living force, each individual race, yet all together. And this life source was, in its coloration, a yellow, orange, a slight hint of goldly color expression that was simply a source within itself that expressed, and it had a slight tint of silver, and it was like these strands that was moving constantly and continuously, and within it emanating a very sharp white light substance, but an actual white light. It was a light. Obviously this power life source was so minute, but it is what substantiated our expression, meaning what gave us the experience of being, of living, of aliveness. It was a constant movement that expressed itself, and it was like we were the manifestations, the voice, the living of that life source, that origins of ourselves and existence. And that is what we as Atlanteans cherished, that life that was within ourselves, within everything that was here. However, what would happen is if one part of existence as a race would create or cause some form of friction or conflict within themselves, within each other, with other races, whether it be through direct interaction, communication, or a simple looking, that would create any form of imbalance within that equality of that life force that is existent. It would create a ripple effect, and that ripple effect will affect that very core, that life force within each molecular manifestational structure. And that is what we as Atlanteans could also detect or pick up, because of our specificity and our very manifestation being sound, and thus in essence with the substance of everything consisting of and existing as sound, sound expression. We could pick up any change within the manifested substantial structure of everything and all that is here, and then accordingly we will thus direct the discrepancy or the change to ensure that a balance and equilibrium, that equality in oneness is always maintained, because we experience that as being our purpose for being, for existing we were the guardians of that life force from which we come, which is here within everything and everyone, and it is our responsibility to ensure that it is always in a state of equilibrium, so that we're able to honor ourselves as this life force within existence, and that life force is obviously of ourselves as ourselves. It's not that we made it into a god in itself. It was that of ourselves that gave us the gift, the ability to be here, to be who we are and how we are. And thus we honored that part of ourselves to a great extent. And we would only utilize our gift, so to speak, of being able to see the future within the molecular manifested structures when and as needed, when we do see that there is a problem that's been manifesting, even with the finest changes that may or might happen. We would make sure that it is immediately directed, so it do not accumulate into any other substance form changes, because everything was so fluid, as a fluid substance yet solid at the same time. It was very formidable, and therefore any change that happened did have a great effect on everything and everyone, even though not all the races were or may have been aware of it. We, along with the Greys, were very aware of any structural or substantial changes within existence, and always ensured that we'd work together in maintaining and standing within a state of equilibrium. Because, I mean, we also experienced the changes, and it was greatly uncomfortable when we experienced these ripple effects coming. Not that it was a form of pain, it was definitely a form of discomfort. Really, the finest change we pick up as like a very big change within ourselves, because of our closeness with ourselves as the sound that was existence. Other races that were more structurally inclined, like working with crystals or systems or communications or various different manifested substances, their inclination was more towards the dense form of the substance that we consisted of and existed as, whereas we were more closer to the actual substance that we consisted of and existed as within existence. And because of our close relationship again with ourselves as the origins of ourselves, we picked up the minutest, smallest, tiniest changes as great experiences that caused much discomfort within ourselves, as well as if there was any imbalance within existence as a whole, it would influence our ability to create as well with sound and with the substance that we consisted of and existed as. And therefore also why our responsibility of ensuring equilibrium, ensuring that equality and oneness, because we would utilize the substance that we consisted of and existed as, the fluid substance of purity, of sound manifested here as ourselves and as existence, to create the sound expressed crystal formations that constituted our planet and our homes and our total civilization. And with any changes within the very substance that was here as ourselves, as and within the manifested molecular structural forms would mean that the purity with which we create a extension of ourselves could not be done, because everything had to be absolutely aligned within the absolute nature of equality and oneness, equilibrium, to express ourselves as who we are, as what is here. Anything else that changes from that would mean that we are not who we are really within ourselves and this existence, and therefore would inept our ability to thus manifest and create ourselves, because there's actual changes within ourselves that we first require correcting. So this was mainly our existence and our responsibility within existence before the time of Earth and humanity, where we would ensure that the internal life stability of ourselves and all races and existence itself was taken care of and was directed. And primarily it was never really like big events that manifested in terms of massive conflicts and resistances or separations that occurred that required much attention. So for what seemed like eternity, we as an existence were existing within a unison where each race were who they are, how they are, and what they are on their planet with their civilization, and we all went our ways. And we interacted rarely, mainly because we, to a certain degree, already knew, because of that oneness that all could experience, that we're here, and each race did their own thing, being themselves, and we obviously exchanged interactions, creations, realizations, communications, but it's not like there was a separation within relationships where some races were more defined within their relationships than others, where other races liked certain races more or less, or where one race was dominating existence in any other way. There was a respect, there was a knowing that was just always there, that this is who I am, this is who you are, this is how you live, this is how I live, this is how we exist, and that was it. So everything was quite minimal, and each race was basically left to itself to develop, to expand, to grow, to be here, and each race played their part in assisting and supporting with the equilibrium, the equality and oneness of existence as a whole. Like ourselves and the Greys primarily worked together because our point was relatively similar or the same, but it's not like we communicated often. It was simply that we didn't require or have to really go to a planet to communicate. We could also communicate what you'll now refer to as telepathically, where we could, for example, as Atlanteans, stand here, and because our interactions was more inclined towards, and with the Greys, we could communicate with them through like being here, and then what we do is within the center of ourselves we had a crystal manifestation within the center of our head region, and we'd within that connect to a particular gray. What will happen within that is the gray would then within themselves experience like a resonance, if you will, a resonance which is a movement of sound, and it will be like us calling them. And then what they do is when they experience that resonant sound, and we'd have a particular sound signature, and they'd know it us, especially when that resonant sound was a silvery white metallic expression with a resonance color of a light blue. That was our resonance signature sound. And then what they do is they'd actually do a breath, they'd breathe it in, and then we'd communicate with them, and in that moment we'd become each other, and it would be like the grey is here within us talking to us, and we in the grey speaking with the grey. And that's primarily how we communicated with resonant sound, the resonant sound containing the totality of ourselves. And then the primary reason for communication then was to cross-reference corrections. Because we were more sensitive to sound changes within existence, within the substance of ourselves, we would primarily notify the greys that this is a resonance change here within existence as a whole. We refer to it as a resonance change again because the resonance changes was the more finer, small changes. For example, where a race or a being within existence would have come into contact with another race for a moment, and they allowed themselves to become the other race for a moment to see what it is and how it would be to experience being another race. I mean, that was also done especially with the young ones that came into being from the races, and they would play and see how I would be if I were you, or how would I be if I were you. And then sometimes within that change, because the young ones weren't yet completely solidified within themselves as the nature of their race, or one can say the laws of our existence, then the changes would create a separation from themselves where they'd go in completely into the other race's expression and then separate themselves from their own instead of unifying themselves with the other race. And that would create a ripple effect throughout existence as substance, which we would thus pick up within the individual molecular structural manifestations. And then the greys would communicate with us in terms of if it is simply a minor change that happened, we would correct it within ourselves, which we would do is, because of us being the very manifestation of the sound within existence, the very substance within existence, and having that close relationship with it, we could simply take that one part, that one molecule within which we had seen the change that had occurred or happened, take it within ourselves, we would place it within our chest area, and we would utilize our sound expression manifestation, which was manifested within the center of our mouths area. In our mouths, as Atlanteans, we had this ball of sound, which was all the sounds within existence manifested as individual sound expressions. So it was like the source of sound manifested, which was us. And we take that sound and then the molecule within the center of our chest area and merge the two, so that all the sounds together within that molecule assist and support with the expression of stabilizing and equalizing the sound within existence. And we would simply take that one step of merging all the sound expressions within existence that was within ourselves with that one molecule. And with that one molecule obviously being interconnected to all molecules, it would correct the totality of existence, in which we existence as the total substance of everything and everyone. And that is when we did the corrections ourselves without requiring to notify. However, if it was like the scenario with the young one, which happened quite often, the grey would then go and communicate to the respective race of the situation that had occurred, and that we corrected it, and obviously teach the young ones in what it is to become a race for a moment in terms of unifying yourself without separating yourself from your origins. The separation from oneself would manifest when one shift oneself within one's substance as one's race that one is or consists of and exists as. It is simply, one can refer to it as like a dimensional shift, where one is not walking in the total unification of self, but shifted out of the molecular structural manifested form as self, as that very source of life that is here within self, and shifted out of it. And it was very easy to shift out. Obviously the consequences of that was uncomfortable, with great discomfort for especially us Atlanteans. However, from a very young age, everyone is educated within their respective races of how to maintain their here-ness with their life source, their substance as what they are, which was much to do with how you move within your physical form, within the substance that you are. And each race had various different movements of how they moved with their physicals to ensure within that movement they remain equal to and one with their life source within themselves. Like, for example, with us Atlanteans, our movement was as the movement of water. Our planet was, its main resource was water. Water was the more substantial liquefied sound. And we say water, please, not the water as you now experience it on this earth. However, if one would take water as is and you'd make it alive in itself, where it would be able to move itself with a bit more elasticity and substance, that was the manifestation of our water on our planet of Atlantis. It was a more substantial form of sound, and it was slightly more substantial than our substance as what we consisted of and existed as. It was more, I'll repeat it again, elastic in nature, yet it had a constant motion, a constant movement that was really, really slow. It was like, I'll make a sound, make it in sound. It was a like a breathing as it was moving within itself. And our physical forms would move according to that sound. So our movement was very slow, wavy, very specific, very soft, gentle, almost ethereal-like. And our physical forms also assisted and supported with that. We didn't have any bone structure. We had a more of a meaty, sinewy, physical, structural form. And again, not meat in terms of physical or sinew in terms of the actual physical. It was more substantial, but it was again sound manifested in more structural shapes and forms that manifested into our physical bodies that we consisted of and existed as. So it was the different alignments, the different structural manifestation and positioning of sound as the molecular structural forms that manifested different experiences of substance. So, for example, with the water, the molecules were aligned in a merged form. For example, where you'll have one molecule merged ever so slightly with another molecule. And in that merging, it would still have half of itself, each part, but it would be merged as one. And then it will create like a chain connection, and that would create the substance of water that would have an elasticity to it. Whereas with our physical bodies, the structural shaping of the molecules to give our physicals a meaty, sinewy form or substance would be the molecules interconnecting, and also within a chain-like structure, but you'll have one molecule with various molecules connecting with different densities. For example, you'll have one molecule merging into half of itself, and you'll have another molecule merging onto that initial molecule, but only with a quarter of itself. And then you'll have another molecule merging with that initial molecule with 3/4 of itself, which would create different densities of sound manifestation as substance manifestation, and that would constitute our physical bodies. And so would give us, in our very movement again, with our physicals being more slightly manifested than the sound manifestation, the liquefied manifestation of sound as the water, which assisted and supported our physical movements within the substance that is here within existence, from and of which we emerged. And with the water and our physicals and our sound that was manifested within us, we would create crystal manifestations. We have done documents regarding how we utilized our physicals to create sound manifested crystals, which we utilized to build our places of rest and interaction as our cities and things like that. So we can get to that in an interview to come as well, and just expand on how that worked, where each race had their particular substance creation, where substance manifested itself into various different forms and manifestations and expressions, like we would express with sound as crystals. Then one had other races that worked with color, other races that worked with this like very manifested form, which was like the experience of rock to the touch. So each race had a different manifested substance that it worked with or expressed, and ours was, as I've mentioned, the crystal manifestations of sound expression. But for now, within this introduction video interview on the race of the Atlanteans, it was to share and give perspective of our purpose, in essence, of the role we played within our existence as it existed before the manifestation of Earth and humanity, and how we maintained the equality and oneness within the substance of existence, with the greys more the equilibrium within the structure, the interaction, the movements within and between the races, and how our belief was primarily that we all originated from the same source, that life that was here within each molecular structural manifested form, that the substance of ourselves and everything consisted of and existed as, and therefore our sole purpose to ensure that we all are here, that our interactions are equal and of respect, and that we consider ourselves and each other to the highest degree of who we are, because we all do come from the same source. We're all here together, and therefore practically it was, from that perspective, to us common sense, and we simply took in that position of ensuring that that life force is and remains equal, that everyone remains within that oneness interaction in consideration and regard of everything and everyone else. And within that we went about our days creating our sound crystal manifestations through our equality and oneness with sound in all its forms, so we could interact with sound in all its multi-dimensional manifested forms it consisted of and existed as, and it was endless, it was eternal, and it was abundant, the various manifestations that sound expressed itself, which was what the life force in essence was in its form as it expressed within each and every single molecular manifested structural form. It was that one sound that made everything and everyone possible, and how that one sound expressed through everything and everyone, making the life that was here so diverse yet the same within the very origins of ourselves and everything and everyone else. And we were always living in a form of gratefulness, a form of enjoyment, a constant curiosity of learning more and more about ourselves as we manifested and created and expressed and existed as sound. And we'd always, for example, investigate the different races in how we and when we have a look at existence within these molecular structural manifested forms, where we would observe the races, but in how they're manifested from the perspective of sound. And what was interesting was that each race's physical form was a different alignment of sounds in how the molecular structures aligned themselves in creating and manifesting a form. And within that also, how the different races communicated or expressed was how that life force sound emerged into individualized creations as beings, as races, as forms. And for example, the structural alignment of the sounds within our physical forms was like a fountain-like expression, where the individual sounds would emerge from the individual molecular structural form, and the sounds would emanate from within that and would express like a fountain, like all the sounds within existence as and within our physical forms would be here as ourselves. It was like an X-ray vision we had, if you will, where we could see beyond our own physical form and the physical form of existence and have a look at what it looks like when you just look at it from within and as sound. And when we looked at ourselves it was all the sounds of existence in a fountain-like expression. When we, for example, looked at the greys, it was a crisscrossing of various sounds, where the sounds would express from the molecular form structure diagonally, vertically, horizontally, like splashes of sound. So because of our sound expression manifestation being more fountain-like, is because we were more the origins of the sound itself that would express. And the greys, for example, were more in the context of the structural, so their alignments was more crisscrossed, multidimensional structural. Then we had, for example, the reptilians, where the sound was more rounded, more intense, with very specific colorations, as the reptilian race was more inclined to creation, to structure, to system, meaning where they would be more inclined to creating. Their sound manifestations from and of the molecular structures were contained yet open at the same time to allow for creation to manifest from structure. So it was like there were this vast manifestation of holders that of sound that was waiting to be created, that was like waiting to be invented. And they were a very creative, inventive race. So for us, from that perspective, it was always very fascinating and interesting to investigate how we were created, formed, and manifested as sound, when looking beyond and through the physical forms that we presented as ourselves. And yeah, I'd say that gives a starting point of our existence within existence that predated this current physical existence. And I focused and touched on our belief of the oneness, the equality that was here, and that we believe that all of us should live with and exist within respect, consideration, and regard, honoring ourselves, our life force, and everyone else. And how we always lived for ourselves and everyone else as sound, how we created with and through and as sound, and how we utilized what is here to ensure that we always remain how we've always existed. Being able to see future playouts, I mean, it was really quite easy and simple because everything was here, and every ripple effect would create a change, and one can actually follow that change that it created, because each ripple is a manifestation of change. And if you would accept and allow that ripple to simply continue, it'll become a life of its own, because it's simply allowing to release itself, and it will obviously become greater and more if one leave it to express by itself, because all the other molecules would rippling with, because it creates not only a ripple effect from a one-dimensional perspective, the ripple effect manifests multidimensionally because of that equality and oneness that was here within existence in the substance that we consisted of and existed as. Therefore, it was always important to have a directive principle, guardians of existence, to ensure that we don't create ripple effects of consequences within existence that disturb what is here as the equilibrium, the here-ness, the sound of here where everything and everyone was allowed to be who they are and how they are and what they are, and as they existed within their civilizations, their planets. And so we always made sure that we didn't abdicate any form of power or responsibility through frictions, through discrepancies and disturbances. And we'll, within our interviews that we continue, obviously share why and how we have accepted and allowed ourselves to get to where we are today within a physical world and humanity. How it is that ripple effects manifested within existence that we didn't see when the war of heaven was upon us and the reptilians was standing before our planet, and we had the idea, perception, belief that everything in existence was fine, when we were being deliberately deceived by one of our own. And that existence was in a state of takeover and destruction, and we hadn't realized it until it was too late, which was the event that happened, which caused the process of the manifestation of Earth and the creation of mankind. And from a certain perspective as well, why we did not intervene then when we could see what had happened within existence as the outflow consequence of the nature that has always been here as ourselves. And we could obviously, within all the ripples that was suddenly here, that we could see when Anu and the reptilians and other races were taking over existence, we could see the future and where we were headed, and for the realization that was required by each and all within existence, we had to walk the consequence. Alright, this then the first introduction video interview, and within the next video interviews we will speak more of our history within the context of what happened with the manifestation of Earth and the creation of human beings. Thank you.